Welcome, San Jose Rotarians, to meeting number 5344. Thank you to the greeting line today, which was the Unhoused Impact Committee. Morris and Brian took that over from me a couple years ago. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate the hard work. If anybody has a guest, would you please bring them up to the microphone? Thank you. Get right into that microphone.
Okay, this is my friend Dee Dee Rogers. She's a small business owner of a company that specializes in IT support for seniors.
Welcome, Dee. Thanks. Ron.
Hello, Mr. President. Ron Zrake, Petrinovich Pugh & Company. My guest today is Rachel Barclay, the new GM at the Silicon Valley Capital Club. This is her second meeting, so I think she likes us.
Come on, Rachel, bring it on. Welcome. Hi, Karen.
Hi, President Steve. I have 3 guests today. First, visiting us for our 3rd time, we have Anna Rudick, Clinical Director for Lokahi Acupuncture in Willow Glen. And I would like to read a text that she sent me at the request of our membership chair and you. After her last meeting, and this might make you a little emotional, she said, "It's been such a delight accompanying you to Rotary meetings. I have to say that it is the first ever type of group in which I have had my needs met. I have felt included, mentally stimulated, inspired, and engaged. To me, that speaks volumes. Welcome, Anna."
Welcome, Anna. That's fabulous. Thank you.
Next, I have Clay Garner, Chief Innovation Officer for Mayor Sam Liccardo. And incidentally, this is his 2nd meeting. He speaks Indonesian, Japanese, Chinese, Spanish, and English. And Anna and he engaged in a few words of Indonesian when they returned to the table last week. So welcome, Clay.
Welcome, Clay. That's fantastic.
Finally, my 3rd guest is the gentleman you may all know, Mr. Les Francis. Les?
Hey, Les.
He's a Spartan graduate, a former member of the San Jose State University Tower Board, a chief of staff to Norman Mineta, a personal friend, and a dear mentor. Welcome, Les.
Les, it's really nice of you to come. Some sad news to share. Our dear friend Thang Do died this past weekend of lung cancer. Thang was sick for a couple of years. Really one of the great people in our community. Any of you who know Thang know he was generous, incredibly smart. In fact, I used to always call him the smartest guy in the room when we had meetings because he was, but generous to a fault. Our community will definitely be less as a result of losing Thang. So we'll have a proper eulogy for him soon. So now for something joyful. Our friend Deanna Persai has been nominated to be a CNN hero. Deanna, wave at the crowd. Wave at your admirers here. So people are nominated, and then there are 10 finalists later in the year, and then finally a winner is selected. The winner gets a $100,000 stipend or gift, and the 10 finalists get $10,000. So if there's voting involved, vote early, vote often. And that being said, we've got a little video to show. John, are we ready for that?
Angel is my sister. She's roughly 1 year my junior. So we grew up almost like twins in rural Indiana.
Delicious.
When she was born, my parents were told that Angel would never be able to walk or talk or clothe herself or feed herself because she had Down syndrome. The recommendation was that she be immediately placed in an institution. My mom said, "Could I just see my baby?" They brought back a warm pink bundle, and my mom looked the doctor in the eye and said, "Thanks, but no thanks, I'm gonna take my baby home." We were forever just connected at the hip. She was my forever playmate. I just knew Angel as living the good life like me, and we were just kind of parallel living lives. And the first summer I came home from college, she was sitting around at home and she wasn't working. My sister's story is very much the norm. College of Adaptive Arts is a lifelong, equitable, collegiate experience for adults with special needs of all differing abilities who historically haven't had access to college education.
Now, how about someone out here? What is up with this warm color spectrum? Jenny.
We started out in 2009 with one class and 12 students, and we've essentially just listened to the students about what they want.
So out, reaching towards the sun.
And so now we have 10 schools of instruction, and they get the same access to the array of classes that any college student can select.
Then to play it, you hit that right there.
We are now on the campus of West Valley College. They get to go and hang out with the student union or get some coffee or walk around campus. It feels like inclusion at its finest.
What does it make you feel or think?
Our college accepts adults at age 18, and our oldest adult now is 73. There is no age out limit, and that was very intentional because I would see my sister as an adult. What I like about you is that your sense of humor. You always know how to tell a good joke. And I love your kindness. And I love how you always are caring about your family members.
That means a lot to me. Well, let's put it this way. The twin sister gave myself experience. I look up to her.
And I look up to you too. We're good for each other, huh?
One of a kind.
One of a kind. I love you.
I love you too.
I am so humbled each and every day by their depth and ideas and ways to make the world a better place.
Deanna, why don't you come up to the mic over here and just say something profound? Any of you who work with Deanna know she is a giver, and I think she'd win Rotarian of the Year every year if we had such an award. Deanna, go ahead.
Thank you very much for this. It is a deep honor. I've been thinking that this is a beautiful honor, and I really hope it sparks a conversation that is very ubiquitous in America as far as what happens to adults when they age out. As I look over here, I was driving here, Rotary is my happy place, and I look out in the crowd and I see so many people that could be CNN heroes, and you all make the world a better place, and thank you. I'm very grateful to you all. Thank you.
We're all proud of you, Deanna. Mark McKenna, come on up. A few weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago, a group of us were really struck by the plight of Afghan refugees. And so we got together and started talking about doing something meaningful for these suffering people. And so Mark has taken the lead, and he's going to share what we're doing. Mark.
So thank you, President Steve, for giving me a few minutes this afternoon to speak with the club both here and on Zoom about a need that is pressing in our own community. Over the past 6 months, more than 650 refugees from Afghanistan have been resettled in Santa Clara County. Another 300 or so are expected to arrive here in the coming months. These refugees are among the more than 78,000 Afghans who have been admitted to the United States on humanitarian parole since August. When American forces withdrew from Afghanistan, their government collapsed and the Taliban took over. These refugees, because they had worked with the American government, with the military, and with NGOs in support of our efforts in Afghanistan, faced a heightened risk of persecution and even death if they remained in the country. And so they were forced to flee on a moment's notice. Because of the help they offered us in the past, they are in desperate need of our help now. To offer this help, the Rotary Club of San Jose has established an ad hoc refugee support committee, and we invite you to join and support our efforts. The International Rescue Committee and Jewish Family Services have been given the primary task of helping these refugees resettle in the United States. They are helping them to find permanent housing, gain access to available social services, and receive the legal services they need to obtain permanent residence. These are all pressing needs. Through the County of Santa Clara, the refugees have access to some basic healthcare services, primarily through a local NGO, Asian Americans for Community Involvement, or ACI. As they integrate themselves into the local communities, these refugees will need access to employment, help with transportation, and support in developing their English language skills. Most have come as families with children who will need a place in our schools, and over the coming months, the Refugee Support Committee will explore ways in which our club can assist in these efforts. However, in the short term, our new Afghan neighbors have a pressing need for basic material goods, for clothes, kitchen supplies, linens, and personal items of personal care. To meet these needs, ACI has established the Adopt a Family program, where organizations and individuals can commit to meet the basic material needs of one Afghan family. If you would like to know more about this program, I urge you to go to the website. The address is www.ronga.com, ACI Rebuilding, but I'm not expecting you to remember that. I was supposed to have PowerPoint slides, but I didn't get them in time, so they're not there. But there will be a notice in the bulletin coming out tomorrow, which will have this information in it. So if you're interested in helping, look for that notice in the bulletin. You can click on the link and go to the ACI website and see what they are doing. With the support of President Steve and the San Jose Rotary Foundation, we will be able to meet the needs of 6 families right now, actually 8 families. I just got 2 more confirmed. And we expect to be able to extend our support to additional families as resources permit. We will also continue to look for ways in which we can provide further assistance. If you would like to join our efforts, you can email me, Mark McKenna, at markreedmckenna@aol.com. Again, that will be in the bulletin. I don't expect you to remember it. We also invite you to join the next planning meeting, which we will be holding here at the Summit Center at 11 a.m. next Wednesday. So if you'd like to join our efforts, come to the Summit Center a bit early and join in thinking about how we can help. We'll start with planning our first project, which is to get these basic needs for these 8 families. The Refugee Support Committee will function as an ad hoc committee for the coming year, after which we'll reassess whether it should become a permanent committee or if its efforts should be folded into the program of an existing committee. Our initial focus is on providing support to refugees from Afghanistan. We can also expect to receive here in the coming months refugees from Ukraine. These refugees will also need support. Over time, if the Refugee Support Committee becomes a standing committee, it could provide an avenue for our club to provide assistance to the many refugee communities that have resettled and are resettling in Santa Clara County. So with that, I thank you for your attention. Thank you, President Steve, for the time, and we look forward to your support.
Thank you, Mark. We need to find a picture of you from sometime after 1980 at some point, Mark. That didn't go over so well, but that's all right. A reminder, these refugees from Afghanistan and Ukraine and elsewhere are in a situation that for us, I think as Americans, is almost unimaginable. Really, it's never happened in our history. Imagine another country invading and all of us having to suddenly go to another country 10,000 miles away. So please participate if you like. Come to our meeting. It's a really nice committee, and I'm hoping it does become a standing committee at some point. Brian Adams and Karen Philbrick, can you come up and talk about your mini masters? So all you mini golf experts, get prepared and join Brian in this quest. Brian Adams.
Thank you. Thanks. Another squatting ovation for me. It's good to be back at the podium. I am here to talk a little bit about golf. I'm going to tee it up for President-elect Karen. It seemed like the fair way to go about this. God, how many more? Karen will tell you the details. A lot of folks are surprised that I am an excellent golfer. I will tell you my home course is Golfland Blossom Hill, but I do have privileges in Milpitas, so that's really a cool thing. Please come out to the Mini Masters. We'll have a lot of fun. Karen will tell you the details, but I'd like to show a few. I think we have some images of when this was held back in 2016. So it's coming back by popular demand 6 years later. Yeah, that's right. Look at Brian Allen, how the other BA, I like to call him, who was very dapper. I think he might have gotten best dressed that day. It was a rainy day. It was kind of those of you who were there, kind of overcast, rainy, but we had a lot of fun. And there's, look at the Georges and Christine Burrows and Leslie Hamilton. And again, it was an event and is an event where you can bring your kids, bring your grandchildren, and just make a day of it. There's Jerry and Gary and Kay and Susan. Again, great times had. There I am with presenting an award, I think, to Stu, past President Stu, who came in. There I'm either doing two things. I either had a hole-in-one, or I was just proving that I would bend over backwards for you as a Rotarian. So, Karen, let's let the folks know how they can get involved this year, please.
He brings the fun and I bring the logistics. So we have a sign-up table out in the lobby. So join us with your grandchildren, your children, your friends. Everybody is welcome. Injuries don't matter. We're going to have a great time. Start at 10 a.m., followed by a pizza party and an awards ceremony in a private room at Golfland. We have lots of awards up for competition, including Best Sportsmanship. So join us and have a good time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Karen. There was a groundbreaking last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, at the Play Garden. There's an expansion going on at the Play Garden, and the queen of the Play Garden, Julie Matsushima, was interviewed, and she was on the news. I think it was NBC, and we're going to show you a little video of Julie being interviewed, which was on TV a couple weeks ago. I hope a few of you saw it. We ready for that, John?
On a recent Sunday at the north end of the Rotary Play Garden in San Jose, a group is gathered.
Good morning, everyone.
They're here to break ground on an expansion of the All Abilities Play Space. Among the group are those you'd expect, elected officials and community leaders, but perhaps the most important person, the one whose love story gave birth to this park.
But I'm going to read something that she wrote.
Well, she isn't here, though she really wishes she were.
It would only take COVID to keep me away. It would only take having COVID to keep me away.
Julie Matsushima has indeed spent the last week recovering from COVID. But to understand the story behind the Play Garden, you have to go back to the late 90s and the birth of Julie's twin granddaughters, Chloe and Amy. Julie first told us the story in 2015.
The nurse came out with Amy and ran right across the hall into the neonatal unit.
Amy had severe medical challenges, and at first, doctors weren't sure she'd make it. But after holding her for the first time, Julie was.
I just felt like she wanted to live. She wanted to be part of the world and be part of life.
Julie became Amy's champion, and in the process, became aware of the inaccessibility of most playgrounds. It was an issue Julie advocated for so successfully that when the San Jose Rotary Club, of which Julie was a member and one-time president, wanted to give the city a grand gift to celebrate its 100th anniversary, well, they were inspired by Julie to build the type of playground
Here we go.
that Amy could truly enjoy. And enjoy it she did. But Amy was to be just the first of many. In fact, since its opening, close to 1 million people of all ages and abilities have visited the Play Garden. It has been so successful, the city of San Jose and the county of Santa Clara are going ahead with plans to expand the Play Garden.
2, 1.
That is what the groundbreaking was all about.
It's just the most awesome, wonderful, proud feeling.
Julie says Amy is now 25, but still asks about the play garden every time they talk and visits every time she's in San Jose. She may not be a little girl anymore, but the legacy Amy and her grandmother leave behind is something children like her will enjoy for years to come.
They won't know me, but they would, I hope, know that somebody cared enough about them to make this happen.
I notice we have 39 people on Zoom today, and I hope Julie Matsushima is one of them. And everybody give Julie a call, see how she's doing. But I know she's feeling well after COVID. The Urban Vibrancy Institute is an organization funded by Gary Dillabo, Jeff Arriaga, his group, and also I think Mark Lazzarini is part of that, along with his partner Tony Ariola. These guys are doing something really beautiful every week. Lots of entertainment. It's every Thursday from 6 to 8:30 at a whole bunch of venues downtown. So please support them. It'll help the restaurants, the bars, the musicians. And Mark, thank you and all your friends for doing that great work. And with that, Sarah Janigan, would you come on up and introduce today's speaker? Thank you.
Thank you, President Steve. Excuse me. It's election season, with the June elections fast approaching. Mail-in ballots have begun. Locally, there are several races that could change the political landscape in the area. Who will be the next mayor of San Jose? Who will join the city council? The sheriff and district attorney races are a few more contests on the upcoming ballot, as well as our assessor. Our speaker today is Professor Garrick Percival from the San Jose State Political Science faculty, where he is also the department chairperson. Dr. Percival works focus on social justice, policy, and racial and social inequality. He has also taken a look at local and state politics and co-authored books and articles on fair election initiatives and the timing of political races in the election cycle. Today, he will try to focus on a few of the significant local races in our area. Please join me in welcoming Garrick Percival.
All right, hi everyone. As you can see, that's an old picture. I'm actually due for a new one though, June 1st. So anyway, thank you very much for the invitation. And I just want to make sure I have control of these slides here, so I know what I'm doing. Okay, all right. As Sarah said, I'm Garrick Percival. I'm the chair of the political science department, and this is busy, as you imagine. This is a busy time of year for my colleagues and I. We do a lot of work in our department on engaging students in the election and trying to offer as much nonpartisan expertise to the broader public through talks like this, but also through the media as well. So hopefully what I have to say today is somewhat helpful. I imagine many of you already know a lot about the upcoming election, and I'll just sort of preface my comments this afternoon, and I'll talk for 15 or 20 minutes or so with the just the idea there's lots of other things going on in elections than what I'm going to talk about today. So these are just some of the things that sort of been at the top of my mind, and I also try to provide a little context for the elections coming up as well. All right, so with that said, of course, as you know, the official election date is June 7th, California primary election, and we've had a number of states now starting to cast ballots in their primaries. Each state sets their own date for the primary elections. This is what we call a midterm or off-year election, and one of the things to kind of keep in mind in a off-year or midterm election, this is where the president is not on the ballot, which drives of course, a lot of attention and a lot of people out to the polls during presidential years. But voter turnout or participation in general is generally much lower in off-year elections. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I won't get into this afternoon. But we can expect here in California probably 45 to 50% fewer voters across the state than we saw 2 years ago. And I'll talk a little bit more about the effect of turnout on local races as well. Of course, at the very top of the ticket here of the state, we have the race for California governor. Gavin Newsom, as we know, faced a recall election. My colleagues and I actually have a book coming out on that this summer. Many of you know Larry Gersten, who I know has spoke here many times. He and I and Mary Kern Percival have a book on the election, recall election coming out in August. So we've looked at that race very carefully. But really, that I think looking ahead now, that was probably the tougher race for him. Of course, anything can change the next several months, but there's not Newsom is not really facing significant challenge on the Republican side or the Democratic side this time around in terms of someone who's likely going to be able to wage a statewide competitive race. So in many ways, the 2021 recall, I think in my mind, was Newsom's biggest test and probably biggest threat to him getting a second term. So, but there are a lot of other statewide races to pay attention to. The Attorney General's race, I think, is a really important one to watch, given a lot of the changes that are going on in the state in terms of law enforcement and criminal justice efforts, as Rabanta is up for election, really for the first time since he was appointed in the position by Gavin Newsom last year. All right, I also want to give a bigger picture in terms of the state legislature. As we move kind of down the ballot, we'll be voting for members of the state legislature in both the state assembly and the state senate, and there's a number of really interesting races in the Bay Area region. But as far as understanding who we're voting for, the state assembly, the lower chamber in the state legislature, has 80 members. And that has been, dominated in recent years by the Democratic Party. And really, in historic perspective, it's hard to think of another era in which the Democrats did better in California. The state for many, many years was run by Republicans. But 60 Democrats currently are holding seats in the state assembly, 19 Republicans and 1 independent. And over in the state senate, 31 Democrats and 9 Republicans. Now, it's very likely that the results of both the primary elections, general elections this year are not going to dramatically reshape the balance of power. And in fact, there's really no chance of that happening. But there are, because of redistricting, I think a lot of really interesting changes in the state legislature forthcoming, in the sense that we have a lot of members who have decided to retire or decided not to run for re-election because their district dissolved. And so that's a bit unusual to see so many retirements. I think we have 17 or 18 members now who decided not to run because of either retirements or redistricting. So we will get a shakeup to some extent in the state legislature, but the overall picture in terms of balance of power, we don't expect to change this election cycle or for the foreseeable future. At the statewide level, a Republican has not won election for statewide office since 2006. So it's been some time since Republicans have been able to wage a winning campaign at the statewide level. All right, I did want to just mention this race here for newly created Assembly District 24. And I just wanted to highlight this because I think it does illustrate some of the larger changes we're seeing because of redistricting. Redistricting is done every 10 years based on the new census numbers. There's a lot of work that goes in by the Citizens Redistricting Commission at the state level to design state legislative seats and districts. And this one, Assembly District 24, is where we're going to be seeing Alex Lee, who is currently serving in Assembly District 25, up for re-election. And Mr. Lee's interesting in part because he was the youngest member of the state legislature in some 80 years. He was elected at the age of 25. But with this district, it's shifted, really the power shifted north, more up into Alameda County. This district has the largest number of Asian American voters in the entire state. But this district now covers all of Fremont, Berryessa, Milpitas, and those parts of our region. So, and it's very likely going to be a competitive race. Lan Diep, who's a former member of the city council, is running. Canton Chu, also a former member of the city council, but had a seat in the state assembly until he resigned to run for county board of supervisors last year. So this is one of the, I think, regional races to watch in terms of the state assembly. But I think the bigger picture here is to think about, to ask ourselves, what is the consequences going to be of redistricting, and will that affect the balance of power over the long run, or affect the competitiveness of some of these legislative seats? All right. Now, moving again further down the ballot, we have the race for San Jose mayor. Sam Liccardo is termed out after 2 terms or 8 years in office, and this is, I think, a really exciting race. We've got a number of really well-qualified candidates who have served in different elected positions, either in the past or currently. 4 primary candidates: Cindy Chavez, Dev Davis, Raul Perales, and Matt Mahan. And what's, I think, really interesting about this race is all of them, to different degrees, but all of them have done, I think, a really good job in terms of kind of build up the foundation of their campaign. It takes a lot of money to run for mayor in a big city like San Jose when you're reaching hundreds of thousands of potential voters. This is going to be, I think, the most expensive mayoral campaign in the city's history, partly because of the competitiveness, but I think also because of the stakes involved. Not only are these candidates able to raise a significant amount of money sort of individually, but also political action committees, independent groups that are funneling lots of money into this race. Now, as far as how I see this playing out, I think it's very going to be difficult for both Raul Perales and Cindy Chavez to make it to the general election. So one of them is likely going to make it. And then Matt Mahan and Dev Davis. Partly I say that in terms of just sort of the ideological split between these candidates. It's tough to see how both Perales and Chavez or Dev Davis and Matt Mahan get through to the general. But of course, we'll see how things shake out. But they've been actively campaigning, doing lots of forums. Many of you may have been to some of these already. And so it's really going to come down to, getting out the vote. As I mentioned in the city council races, a lot of people, even though they're registered to vote, do not participate in primary elections. So it's really the challenge for each of these campaigns is to try to be able to target those people who they think are going to be most likely to turn in their ballots by June 7th. All right. I also wanted to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the city council because, in San Jose, which we don't have a strong mayor system, it's up to the mayor to work with the rest of the city council to negotiate policy, to try to persuade members of the council, to try to make the case to the broader public. In short, who sits on the city council really matters, and the balance of power on the city council really matters. In this election cycle, we have the odd numbers of districts in the city are all up for re-election. Districts 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And Pam Foley in District 9 is running unopposed. So I think she stands a very good chance of getting reelected. But we also have a set of new districts in the city as a result of the redistricting process at the city level. This is a map. It's not going to be it's not great. You can't see it very well up here on the screen, but I do encourage you to take some time to learn more about the districts and the characteristics, demographics in the different districts across the city, because they too may have an effect on the races upcoming. Now, the city council, broadly speaking, has been divided for a number of years between sort of more business-oriented candidates, labor-backed candidates. I think that's generally a good way to understand the city council. Of course, coalitions are formed on different issues in different ways, so it's more complicated than that. But right now, sort of the labor-backed candidates, if you want to call them that, have a slight advantage, sort of on divided contentious votes, often are split 6-5 in favor of more labor candidates. So the outcome of these elections, and depending on who wins, could again shift that balance of power back sort of more of the Licardo's coalition that he's built during his 2 terms in office. But again, we'll see. Candidates can be elected to a full 4-year term from the primary in local races. So if a candidate receives more than 50% of the vote, they don't have to stand for election in the general in November and will take office next year. So in some of these races, it's very possible. I mentioned Foley, of course, but there are others that may be able to secure 50% of the vote. So turnout really will matter. Now, with all the attention paid to these races, it is important, I think, a point to make is that most registered voters don't even bother to vote in primary elections at the local level. So if you take a typical district in San Jose, which is about 100,000 people, there really will be about, on average, 10 to 11,000 votes cast in total, and not just for one candidate, but total. So each of these candidates that are running for city council are really trying to grab a very small slice of the electorate, right? And the people who tend to participate in primary elections look very different in terms of their kind of issue positions that they take, their engagement with politics, than people who vote in general elections. All right, so one of the races I think to watch is District 3, which is the district we're in right now, the downtown area. And we have 5 candidates who are running to replace Raul Perales, who's been termed out. Mr. Perales is running for mayor. And the 5 candidates from left to right, Joanna Rao, Omar Torres, Irene Smith, Elizabeth Jin Hale, and Von Torres. And again, this race in particular, if you look at voting characteristics in District 3, again, about 9,000 or 10,000 votes total. So about 25% turnout in the last number of elections. So we should probably expect to see something like that in terms of turnout in this race. So downtown district, this has been historically a stepping stone for mayor. Sam Licardo most recently came out of District 3. So we could, if the winner of this race could very well be in a number of years talking about it may be running for mayor if history proves to be any guide. All right, and then another, I think, interesting race too that's also going to be, I think, reshaped by redistricting to some extent in terms of increasing the number of Asian American voters by about 10% in this district compared to what it was 10 years ago. So Maya Esparza is the incumbent candidate running for re-election and is running against Bien Duan and Bon Lay, who has run for office before. So this is one, I think, where the outcome of this could really tip the balance. One of the races, the 7 and 5 potentially, are ones to watch in terms of shifting the balance of power. But Esparza has worked really hard to try to connect with lots of different people in her district. Without an Asian American on the city council. At the moment, there's a big push to try to get greater representation for the Asian community. And so one of the things to watch in this race is turnout among Asian American voters. I think that could be a big thing to take into account, particularly as there are more Asian American voters in the district than there was previously. All right, and then just a couple words on the county races. Of course, we have the assessor's race. That's what Mr. Stone here. We have the Santa Clara County District Attorney's race. And this is interesting in part because we're having much larger conversations about criminal justice reform in recent years in this country. California's prison system has been reduced dramatically. We've had statewide initiatives like Proposition 47, which reduce some penalties on nonviolent offenses. Voters have supported a number of those kinds of initiatives. We've got the moratorium on the death penalty in the state. This is the first time that Jeff Rosen has faced a challenger since the first time he was elected to office back in 2010, took office in 2011. But in California, we've seen a couple of more progressive prosecutors or district attorneys elected George Gascon, who was a former district attorney in San Francisco, is now DA down in Los Angeles County. And then Chesa Boudin up in San Francisco. Interestingly enough, both of those district attorneys are up for recall elections this June, which really kind of speaks to a lot of the tension around criminal justice reform measures more generally. For Democrat, more progressive candidates who want to try to push for more reforms versus those who are more or who are concerned about too much reform. So Rosen is really trying to pitch himself as sort of a balanced candidate, someone who's done, as he argues, a number of reforms in the Santa Clara County criminal justice system. Sajid Khan, who is running to his left, really challenging mass incarceration, racial and ethnic inequalities in the system, which are very real, and they are very real across the state. The interesting backdrop to this race, though, is an uptick in some kinds of crimes in California, including violent crimes, and the extent that voters are really are they going to put sort of the brakes on criminal justice reform and go back to sort of more traditional, at least in this state, tough on crime policies, which of course also led to over-incarceration in the state. So it's a lot for voters to kind of sift through. So a three-way race. Daniel Chung is the other candidate here. Rosen has been able to get elected directly from the primary every time. Of course, he's run for re-election. So this time he may not get 50% of the vote. We'll see. But if he does not, then he will of course face a runoff in the general. And then final 2 points on some local ballot measures. Santa Clara County Measure A, if passed, would extend the term limits for the Santa Clara Valley Water Commissioners to 4 consecutive terms from 3, and this has been in the news a lot lately, given the wording on the initiative on the ballot. A no vote would keep the current term to its status quo, 3 consecutive term limits. So that's on the ballot. And then the last one is an issue that I actually have been working on a lot, so I'm not a unbiased person to talk about this. I sat on the San Jose City Charter Review Commission all of last year. And my colleagues and I at San Jose State have done a lot of work on analyzing potential consequences of this measure, which would, if passed, would move the timing of San Jose's mayoral elections from the current gubernatorial years to the presidential years. Estimates suggest, and some of the work that we've done could increase if the timing of mayoral elections are moved to presidential years. We would see an increase of about 30% of voter turnout, or about 160,000 additional voters, given the current registration numbers in the city of San Jose. So, and the argument for that is that it would increase participation, strengthen the democracy and connection between voters and the elected officials. The most important, I think many people argue, most important elected official in the city, the mayor, the only position elected citywide. A no vote would keep the mayoral elections where they are now in the gubernatorial year. So, and there's one final point on this. If Measure B passes in June, the candidates running for mayor now, whoever gets elected, would serve a 2-year term, so that they would begin serving next year. That term would end in 2024, when they would stand for re-election for a full 4-year term, and then would have 2 full terms, potentially serve after that. So that person could conceivably serve for 10 years if they served the first 2-year term and then ran for and was reelected by the voters twice. So those are a look at some of the local ballot measures. Again, big picture, lots of stuff going on. We have the governor's race, attorney general, all the statewide offices, secretary of state, superintendent of public instruction, and many other important local races as well that I didn't mention, including assessor, sheriff, and other, of course, city council races in the region. So I will leave it at that. Sorry, did you take some questions? If anyone has any questions, we're happy to do my best. So thank you very much.
Larry, go ahead.
I'm interested in what you think about the surge in recall elections, usually for one of 2 reasons. One is people don't like a single decision or a single thing that a duly elected person is done, or people that use the recall because they can't get elected in the normal process.
Right, so California it's pretty relatively easy to recall candidates in California compared to most other states. Yeah, many would argue too easy. It's fairly easy to, if you have an organized campaign to get 12% of voters, this is for statewide office. So I think one of the challenges to think about recall is what does a recall represent? Does it represent a broader backlash against a candidate, or is it a well-organized minority group of people who use the avenues available to them to sort of create opportunities to throw someone out that might not lose in a normal election, right? Or might not win, as you pointed out. So I do think there's a lot of discussions. We'll see how this gets carried out about some institutional reforms, make it harder to recall officials, make the signature requirements higher, have some other kind of criteria that's sort of broader based discussion about what would make someone be qualified to stand for a recall election. But also with the recall a couple of years ago for the in the judge's case, that this is not necessarily at least at the beginning or a broad-based movement to reform or recall. Right? It's an organized, in many ways, organized interest group, just like we see in other kinds of politics. So, but again, California, no reason is required to recall someone. Other states have laws on things like corruption and other kinds of illegalities while in office. California's not that. So I think more broadly, I think we're having, and this is true at the state level, should we make it harder to recall?
Would recall reform require a constitutional amendment?
Yes. Yep, it would.
Just a reminder before Fernando asks his question, if you have a red badge, you can come right to the front of the line. Go ahead, Fernando.
My question has to do with your opinions regarding a stronger city mayor versus the current situation we have now, where the city mayor is basically another member of the city council.
Yeah, so, well, I guess thanks for the question. I'll just bring in some of my experiences from the year I served on the Charter Review Commission, where my other fellow commissioners, I think that the consensus is a lot of people are distrustful of a strong mayor. I personally believe that there's a lot of value in a stronger mayor system in a city the size of San Jose, but it's not clear cut. There with any, I think, point I would like to sort of emphasize, there's no perfect system. You can't design a governing system that's going to work in every case. It requires people to compromise. It requires good people to be committed to making the system work, following a set of traditions that have generally worked. So with that said, one of the things that I heard from the public on that issue is a lot of people are very skeptical of mayoral power, and the risk is greater by granting an individual power than sort of the benefits that might come from a stronger mayor. That's what I heard. But there's also just sort of the bigger climate, I think, as we're seeing in American politics right now, is just a lot of distrust. Distrust in institutions, distrust in individuals, distrust in the media. And so I think that filters down to the local level, where people they're really skeptical about what change will bring, and they'd rather just keep the thing as it is.
So thank you very much for coming. You've hedged all your bets. Who's going to be the next mayor? And is Jeff Rosen going to keep his job? And I'd like your direct opinion if you're willing to do it.
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, so I'm not going to make a prediction on the mayor's race. But I will say this. I think that I will make a prediction on who I think, and I've said this to others as well, who I think will move to the general election. I think Matt Mahan and Cindy Chavez would be the most likely to move to the general. They also, of course, are the two largest have the most money, but money doesn't always matter. It matters a lot in politics, but it's certainly not everything. So that would be my inclination there. As far as the district attorney's race, I think one important thing to keep in mind with those kinds of races is incumbents almost always win those races, about over 90%. Many times district attorneys don't face any opposition. So with that said, I think the Rosen is in a strong position, just sort of what we know about district attorneys races generally. But I do think that having this is the first time we've had opposition, and I would say opposition that is really bringing a lot of important issues to the debate, to think more carefully about how we run our criminal justice system, who it works for, the kind of communities that are affected by it, and what can we do to make it better. So I think even if Rosen wins rather easily, which I don't know if he will, but I think just having competition in these races is a good thing.
So we're going to go from the big picture to the micro. I was looking at the redistricting of the city council seats, and I was surprised, I didn't realize until you said it, that only half the seats are up. And so I'm really curious about this fact. I noticed, for example, I'm in District 3, we got some of District 6, and I think some of District 3 went over to District 8 or 7 or something. So with this odd, I mean, there are people in District 6 who are represented by somebody on the council who's not running for election, who will now be voting in District 3, having another person representing them on the council. I'm just curious about how that works.
Yeah, you do have some weird situations like that. There's really only one term. With the first cycle, it cycles through, and then it won't be that way. Yeah, I think those are probably going to be, especially in a primary election, really marginal effects. I don't think it's going to tip the balance of any one race. But it does say that anytime we have this the redistricting process, there's candidates who no longer have a district. Right, so they have to decide are they going to run in a different one. So there's both for voters and for candidates. There's a lot of reorganization that has to happen. So in the end, that is a very difficult process. For people who sat on the Charter Reform Commission, who spent months studying it, and again, there's no perfect district. You try to do your best to make it right, to make it equitable, which I think is really important. I think a lot of work went into that to try to make it more equitable, to give voters of all demographic groups their voice, and that's really important in a city like San Jose.
We're going to interrupt just a second. Can the speaker address the race for sheriff?
Well, it's the race for sheriff. I mean, Lori Smith, of course, been in office for a very long time, and is not running for office this time. So we do have two challengers. Bob Johnson from Palo Alto Police Chief, and then Kim Jensen, who is a member of the Sheriff's Department. So this is again the first time in a long time that Santa Clara Valley voters won't see Lori Smith on the ballot. I think it's going to be a competitive race. Sheriff's race, like the district attorney's race or the assessor's race, is in political science what we call typically low information elections. Judges who are running for office in California is another example, where a lot of voters don't know much about these offices. They're not quite sure what these individuals who get elected do. And so you have, I think it's important to become more informed because these are really important positions. So I think my guess is there's a lot of undecided voters in these races who just really haven't had time to study the candidates. And so I don't have any prediction there what's going to happen in that race.
I'm curious if you think it's time for a different narrative around what you described as business versus labor in San Jose. I look at what happened in downtown West and business and labor united on one of the biggest votes in San Jose's history. Do you think it's time to tell a different story about moderates and progressives?
Yeah, I do. It's a nice shorthand, but it really, especially as we've had a lot more conversations in this city, and rightfully so in my view, on historical racism, on the push for racial inequality, to having, the east side of the city has really been shut out in many ways, the political process, and trying to find ways for the communities on the east San Jose to be a full partner in getting resources that are badly needed in that part of the city. So there are, coalitions are formed around on policy issues, right? And so which policy issues are brought to the forefront, what we're talking about, you can form new coalitions, but also thinking about issues in different ways, in innovative ways. That's how innovation occurs on policy matters, is thinking about them in different ways, coming from them from a different, thinking about them from different perspectives, different groups who maybe, like I said, haven't had their story told. So there are opportunities, I think, for innovative politicians and to get us not only as a community, but also elected officials to think differently. And that can bring about a lot of new coalitions beyond just business labor, right? Which doesn't really fully tell the nuanced differences that can come up on different issues. So I think, it's a great point.
I was wondering, since you were on the Charter Review Commission, if there was any consideration or discussion about moving all the council elections to the presidential year, because it seems like the 13579, their turnout's going to just sink if that happens, because they won't even have the mayor's election to worry about.
Well, so right, I guess thank you for the question. It's a great point. We did talk about that. I think there's something to some advantage in not having the full council up all at once. For two reasons. One is I think it's beneficial to have some institutional memory. So if you potentially get to have all new council members, although that's probably not very likely, but policy issues are very complicated. It takes a long time to get up to speed to really become knowledgeable about these different issues. So not having the council stand for election all at one time may be beneficial. Having different electoral time horizons, right? That's kind of a fancy way to think about, when are you up for election, and who's, does a candidate feel comfortable maybe taking a tough vote because they think it's the right thing to do, and not having to worry about being elected right away or standing up for re-election. So staggering the terms gives the officials, I think, a different sense of the electoral politics around these issues. But my other point is there's already a lot of inequality in turnout and under the current system. And the big differences actually come between who's elected in the primary election, as I was talking about earlier, and who's elected in the general election. Because right now you can have someone who's directly elected from the primary is elected with about a third of the voters as would turn out in the general. So currently we already have big differences in turnout. And so that's something to think about as well.
We're just about out of time,
Sure.
But Dave, how about a 10-second question and a 20-second answer?
Can you speak to the politics of the CSU and whether San Jose State will have a permanent president anytime soon that will impact this community?
Presidential search is just starting. And so that's going to take some time. I think hopefully by late this year, early next year would be the hope.
Thank you to Garrick Percival for today's program. We have made a donation in your name to the NAACP, Safeguarding Civil Rights and Voting Rights for All Americans. So please give Garrick a round of applause.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
And next week's speaker will be Sal Pizarro. So everybody be here to give Sal lots of love. He's going to do a long personal about his life, and it's a wonderful story. And so with that, please come next week, and thanks for coming today.